Hello and welcome to 15 minutes on fortified wines. With the holidays upcoming, what better time to discuss fortified wines than right now? So Australia actually has quite the history of fortified wine production. It dates back to the early days of wine production in Australia, largely in most part because we were a British colony and that was what was being drunk in Britain. And that became what we exported back to Britain and subsequently became what we drank locally. And for several decades, port and sherry style wines, and we'll talk in a moment about name changes, recent name changes. Those styles of wines for several decades were about 70% of production, and they were the preferred styles to drink. Current production right now it's a bit more limited, but that legacy remains. All manner of areas in Australia have a history of fortified wine production, but the real sort of spiritual homes tend to be a discussion around Rutherglen, famous for very unique and very special styles of fortifieds, and Barossa. So a quick overview of naming, because clearly port and sherry and Tokay, those names had to change because they are about specific places. So right now, what we used to historically call port are called fortified tawny or fortified vintage, so representing the two different styles. Classic Rutherglen Muscat, which we're going to dig into a little bit today, that remains the same, but it used to be called Rutherglen Tokay. That had to change, and it is now called Topaque. And what we historically called sherry is now called a Pera. But rather than having me discuss all this, we've got two fantastic guest speakers today. Fiona from Seppeltsfield and Jules Campbell from Campbells up in the Rutherglen.
Hi, Mark.
Good morning, because it is morning where you are, and you're both at Seppeltsfield. Having you both together, that's wonderful. So, Jules, I'm going to start with you, and we're going to go into the Rutherglen, because for people that have not been there, it's a very unique place, historically specialized in Muscat and what is now called Topaque. Why? What's the history of it? Why was that particular style developed there? Perhaps you could sort of illuminate that.
Yep, sure. I think it's important to remember that Rutherglen has been producing wine since the mid sort of 1800s. And as you explained earlier, Mark, obviously fortifieds were a big part of what was really popular at the time and remained popular for almost 100 years into the 1970s even. So, and Rutherglen being very inland, it's more of a continental climate. So we do have lovely warm, dry days and quite sunny days, and also normally a nice warm, dry autumn. So we have the ability to really ripen things to that next level. But also we have, being inland, we have those lovely cool nights. So we can retain acidity and retain that element of freshness within our styles. So you can see there on the screen a picture of some beautiful muscat as it's just starting to raisin up. And so we still get freshness in that fruit, but then beautiful sweetness that allows us to create something that's really delicious and quite unique to our region. So it's a really quite a specific style of wine we make, and we use Rutherglen Brown Muscat, which is the not so pretty name. Muscat Petit Grain Rouge is a much nicer way of saying it. Is our particular clone of muscat that we use for making our muskets. So yeah.
But it's also, and that's the picture we saw. But it's also a very unique kind of style because while it's almost like this strangely modified, for the geeks in the audience, a modified Cellar system where you've got always elements throughout the different levels. You've always got these elements of aged wine in there, but there's always that fresh, vibrant sort of muscatty quality. It's almost like the history has always been wanting to still preserve that lovely muscatty quality, but also adding in those complex flavors from the aged wines. I think that's really unique and really beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what we get over, our wineries now in Rutherglen, we're running on sort of 5th to 7th generation winemaking. So we've got the sort of all the sort of the inherent knowledge from all the blending of overdoing it for so many years, but also most importantly, those wine stocks that we have of such beautiful and ancient wines that still hold a bit of that freshness, but we have those to blend back with our more recent harvests of muscat to keep that freshness and that vibrancy, but then integrate with that amazing sort of rancio and intense depth and character that we get from.
Now I did try, and this was not with you at Campbell's, but I tasted there before. But I was with David Morris at Morris's, and he poured me a straight 100-year-old muscat from a barrel that was essentially you needed a spoon to taste it. But he said we would never bottle that because we think that complexity is fantastic for just making the wines more complex, but singularly bottling that one barrel, which is going to be a little different when we talk about Seppeltsfield, is not something you want to do. It's that combination that really makes it special and very unique. And frankly, Muscat is made into sweet wines in all different parts of the world, but there is categorically nothing like Rutherglen Muscat anywhere on the planet.
That's exactly true. I can't add anything to that, but I agree with David in saying that. Plus, we just don't have enough of those old stocks to bottle, and they're all left on the glass because they are so sticky. They just sort of, remain all the way up the sides of the glass. So yes, and that freshness really is what we also need to make that balance.
So yeah, we're going to get back to discussing application for these fortified wines because I think people tend to be a bit narrow in what they think of. But let's discuss fortified tawny and fortified vintage, but specifically fortified tawny, which is just absolutely some of the best of that style is coming from Seppeltsfield. So Fiona, tell us a bit about that history of fortified wine or port, what we used to call port production in Barossa, and then specifically how it affects Seppeltsfield.
Thanks, Mark. Well, it's a pretty similar story for tawny in the Barossa. The fact that, as you both said, up until the 1960s, fortified wines were what Australians were making and drinking, and somewhere 70 to 80% of the wines available were in fact fortified. So as I think it's well known, after World War II, so post World War II, immigration to Australia, Australians really started to change their drinking habits to table wine, and also with the advent of technology such as refrigeration, it really started to change up what Australians were drinking. So after the 1960s, with immigration to Australia post-World War II and the advent of technology such as refrigeration, Australian winemaking and therefore drinking habits really started to change. But fortifieds are such an important part of our winemaking heritage, and they are absolutely national treasures. And so they're styles that we're really proud to maintain and look after and still present to the drinking public.
And I love that. And I do think that's such a lovely thing because there is, to my mind, the sense that I get, but whether it's in Rutherglen, certainly at Seppeltsfield, is this sense that you feel like you're custodians of a very special piece of history and that needs to be preserved. And thank goodness for that, because you're absolutely right. These are national treasures. And just because drinking trends change, I would hate to lose them. And it's awesome that the production still continues.
I think custodianship is a great word, and we particularly feel that here at Seppeltsfield. Benno Seppelt was the eldest son of Joseph Seppelt, who founded Seppeltsfield, and he must have been an absolutely wonderful man, an absolute visionary, because it's because of his vision that we have the Seppeltsfield 100-year Para in our portfolio. So back in 1878, after the completion of the first winery on the property, but also to commemorate his father who had passed earlier that year, Benno Seppelt decided to lay down a barrel of his finest port and decreed it wasn't to be touched for 100 years. And every time I say that, I just want to pinch myself because the vision, the audacity almost of that is incredible. For me, though, the fact that every year subsequent wine has been laid down to keep the Centennial system going is just a testament to what a audacious idea that is, and the fact that, accountants or family squabbles or change of ownership hasn't dented that resolve to maintain the Centennial system. So
and I think it's lovely too, because I spoke to a Portuguese producer and owner who owned one. He used to previously own Cristiano Vanzella, previously owned Quinta de Noval, and he said, "Wow, we can't do that in Portugal. We can't give you an unbroken line from 1878. We can show you some older ports, but we do not have what effectively would be in Portuguese terms colheitas, aged tawnies. They can't even do this in Portugal. So we've got a really unique thing here."
Absolutely, an unbroken line of year-dated tawnies, 1878 to 2022. And I always just have to remind myself when we lay down the new vintage that my children won't see that wine as it was intended, as a 100-year-old wine. So it really puts, a lot of things into perspective.
It's amazing. It's amazing. And to go there, and you are always very gracious when we bring guests. Everyone gets to walk around and try their birth year, and it's one of those really kind of special moments in the wine business. No matter how experienced the people are or inexperienced they are, it's a really special thing. I like doing it because I'm a lot older than the groups I bring there, and my wine's more complex and more interesting. So I always get a kick out of that. But I think
Cellar is the best place in the world to be the oldest person in the room, for sure.
Yes, thank you. Very cool. Now, I think one of the things we've addressed the fact that the production has dropped. People aren't, tastes are changing a little bit. But I do think it's really interesting in that I think we're a bit narrow in the way that we sort of approach fortified wine consumption. I think, traditionally with port and cheese or that sort of stuff. But what about for you, Julie, up in Rutherglen? You've got different ranges. Some are a bit lighter, some are a bit richer and heavier. What are you finding that works really well? Like, what's something either a little different or just traditional that you like pairing those wines with?
Yeah, sure, Mark. And I think it's important, as I think you briefly explained in the beginning, we have devised our fortifieds, or classified them, if you like, into a bit of a system to at least allow people to understand them and to see what they're drinking and understand that they've either got a fresher style or something that's really rancio and really full on and intense, which might be a rare, as opposed to our Rutherglen Muscat, which is our entry level, very vibrant, sort of aromatic, expressive version of Muscat. So we have tried so many things with fortifieds. We've had meals where we have a whole meal from entree through to rich, delicious, decadent chocolates at the end of the meal, all served with fortified. So there is a way that they can work with a whole meal. We tend to say with our young, vibrant muskets, just to have a little sip on ice as an aperitif, or you can serve them with a really a vibrant fruit dessert. So like a maybe a fruit flan or something like that that's got some really fresh fruit characters. But then as you get into sort of the classic muskets, which have got a little bit more intensity and just starting to show a bit of rancio, but still with some vibrant fruit character, they actually work really well with like a souffle or something that's got sort of like a bit of a really savoury note, and they can also handle a fair bit of spice. So like a spicy soup in the middle of winter or something along those lines works really well. Just a little taste, not over the top. Yeah. And then the Grand, which really shows a lot more sort of rancio and depth coming through. That's fantastic with like a terrine or something like that. They've got that sweetness, but then that really sort of salty edge as well. And for our rares, well, really, we just need to sip those on their own. They'll go with anything, but really, they're just the best way to have them is just to sip them with a dark chocolate or a little espresso coffee. And that's
totally
how we
agree.
choose
That is a special thing that needs to be just on its own. And it's important to note that those wines, those top rare wines from a lot of the producers, yourself included in Rutherglen, they get perfect scores from judges on regular occasions. Wine Press, they give them 100 points out of 100. They are really special occasion wines and something that absolutely should be had on its own. Now at Seppeltsfield, sorry, go ahead, Jules. No, go ahead, Jules.
No, sorry, but I was just going to say, I think it's really important to know as well with our fortifieds, and Fiona agree with this as well, that it's not a wine that you have to open up and drink, straight away. It's something that will be fine in the bottle half full for over a month. So it's just I have my whole range open at home, and I just have a little sip of one night and a sip of one 3 nights later. It's so they're quite versatile wines, and they're not something to shy away from because they're a little bit different. But I think just to be enjoyed. That's what they're there for.
Awesome, fantastic. Fiona, now I know at Seppeltsfield, the primary, sort of the famous are the fortified tawnies for sure, and some fortified vintage. But you also have a sherry cellar as well, or an apera cellar, as is the term now. So I guess there's a little broader range for you to play with in terms of application in the meal, or for wine and food pairing.
Yeah, we do, Mark. We run 3 Fino apera cellares at Seppeltsfield. So the DP117, which is the Fino style, the DP116, which is the aged Flora Apera, and the DP38, which is the rich rare Apera, more Oloroso in style. I think, as Julie has already said, these wines are made to savour. They're not wines that have been made to, really drink a whole bottle in one sitting. So they're definitely wines to share. They're definitely wines to sip and really think about the food matching with those wines. And I certainly agree with Terrine or Pate are a beautiful match to these fortified wines. And really, the 100-year-old tawny is very much like the rare muscats. Is that really they are a thing to behold on their own, but do go very well with a beautiful dark chocolate or an espresso coffee.
Love it. Well, long live these fortified wines. I think they're really special treasures in Australia, and I'm really thankful that the history and heritage is being preserved. And kudos to all those producers. But I do like this idea of the sweet wine as an aperitif. You get it in France. Think about it in France when you travel around France. You always get a sweet style of wine for an aperitif. The French believe that's a great appetite stimulator, and I think it's awesome. And we just need to think outside the box a little bit more with these wines. Thank you so much for your time. This is fantastic. And see you next time. And I'm in Australia. Well, fantastic stuff. It's so good to see that legacy being preserved. Gotta love fortified wines. Thanks for tuning in. Next month, stay tuned. It's going to be on winemaking practices, how things have evolved in Australia and where we sit today based on some of our history and the evolution of our winemaking practices. Look forward to seeing you then.